very much, and let me also greet my fellow African colleague and minister from Rwanda, ambassadors, councillors, and ladies and gentlemen. BRICS, of course, is an item very much in the news for many different reasons, and depending on the kind of vantage point that we have. And we meet at an interesting time where the narrative about BRICS and the potential that they have to offer is itself, if you like, in transition. For the last 5 years, there's been a clear recognition that the BRICS countries and economies were certainly important engines of global growth. Post-2008 and the Lehman crisis, the emerging market economies contributed some 50% of the global growth and kept global demand and dynamism alive at a time when the previously dominant economies of the globe found themselves in difficulty as a result of the financial crisis and the once-in-70-year recession that all of us around the world experienced in many different ways. Today, I suppose the question is, how do we both combine the concept of being engines of growth to, if you like, engines of recovery, but perhaps more importantly, engines of a new type of growth model that will create a more sustainable environment for business, for governments, and more importantly, for the 7 million citizens that occupy the globe today. So what exactly are the prospects of BRICS countries fulfilling that promise, if you like? For the last 10 years, if we look back, the period up to about 2007, 2008 was a period of, if you like, on reflection, a period of hubris, a period during which it was felt that financial deregulation was the most important thing, where the financial sector grew many, many times bigger than the real sectors of our economies in important parts of the world, and where all of us made more than a fair return, whether we were in government from the point of view of fiscal revenues or businesses from the point of view of their returns on investment. But then, of course, came the catastrophe of Lehman Brothers, if you like, and whatever underlay that catastrophe in terms of what the new governor of the Reserve Bank of India would call the global fault lines. It's those fault lines that over the last 5 years, all of us have been reflecting upon and trying to understand its implications and work out what does it mean to both deal with those fault lines, what we today call structural reforms, and find ways of relocating ourselves, not just as BRICS countries, but as important economies, both in the advanced world and in the so-called emerging world at this point in time. And so the narrative over in the post-2008 period has been about the fragility of the recovery. You, I'm sure, all remember around 2010, many people saw green shoots of different kinds. And suddenly the shoots would appear and then they would disappear. And so we've had, over the last 5 years, a very, if you like, tempestuous period where all of us had glimpses of recovery in the more important parts of the global economy, but a sustained growth pattern certainly amongst the emerging markets during that time. We've seen the financial sector grapple with all sorts of issues and grapple with regulatory intent, if you like. A lot of time within the G20 context was spent on how do we re-regulate, if you like, the financial sector, and how do we create a new paradigm of regulation through the Financial Stability Board, which was created by the G20. And these are the kinds of questions and challenges that we have dealt with over the last 4 or 5 years and continue to deal with, I'm sure, for many years ahead, as we still look for solutions to issues such as too big to fail within the banking sector. Just yesterday, the FT was talking about how the European banks need to be stabilized and dealt with in terms of their challenges in order that they don't become a source of a new sense of crisis or a trigger for a sense of crisis, if not a real crisis itself. But during this period, the emerging markets and the BRICS countries in particular, I come from a very small, humble country called South Africa. We're pretty good at cricket and rugby, as many of you would know. Our growth patterns don't keep up with that, but have the potential certainly to reach there. And BRICS countries continue to be important drivers of both global growth and growth in the environment. I'm sure as I say that, many of you are asking, but look at the numbers today. But I'll get to that point in a moment. We've also, over the last 4 years, had a number of measures which have been either thought about or both thought about and implemented from governments in order to try to find a way to boost demand and to boost growth and to once again recover from the Lehman moment and the once in 70-year recession. And we had, over this period, in some parts of the world, quite an intense debate around whether it's monetary instruments or fiscal instruments that will actually give us the kind of trigger or levers that we require in order to generate a new sense of confidence in growth and in job creation around the world. And so, depending on the country environment, we've now become very used to the idea of unconventional monetary mechanisms being utilized, quantitative easing in some parts of the world, Abenomics in other parts of the world. And as we all know, the last 3 months have been about how do we unwind from these quantitative easing mechanisms. And long before we've actually got to the unwinding, just the talk of unwinding has created all sorts of waves of uncertainty around the globe and certainly in the emerging markets as well. The flip side of that coin has been whether countries either have the capacity or the political space, or if you like, the market space, to introduce fiscal measures. And many people in many parts of the globe still believe that fiscal stimulus would have been an important complement to whatever monetary measures we've taken. But that debate continues today, even within the ranks of the IMF as they have their annual meetings later this week. But the most important conversation of the last few months, as I said, is quantitative easing and the tapering of quantitative easing. And it's in that kind of context that there's some doubt being created, if you like, and a partial narrative that is developing which says, are these BRICS countries still engines of growth, and are they still engines of recovery, as the title of this part of our program seems to suggest. So why is quantitative easing and the tapering thereof such a difficulty? Well, in the period where returns were looking dismal in the advanced economies and where cheap money was available, as we all know, there was a rush of capital into many emerging markets. There was a sudden appreciation of currencies in many BRICS countries, but other economies as well. There was talk, if you will remember, 2 years ago, about capital controls, about intervening in the market in one form or another in order not to allow an over-appreciation of currencies, something that South Africa itself was confronted with. There was talk of currency wars at that point in time. And the war never quite came, but those were important discourses expressing concern about the kind of direction that certainly the financial flows were taking and the form that they were taking at that point in time. At the same time, the European crisis was probably at its worst and still remains largely unresolved, although we're seeing better numbers just above 0 now, and so some confidence is returning to a point which says perhaps the European economies and the Eurozone economy is going to be above the 0 line in some ways. But The damage that was done during this period is the slowdown that we saw in the major emerging market economies. With that slowdown came a slowdown in demand for commodities, and those of the BRICS countries that were important providers of commodities, certainly to countries like China and India, began to experience two things. One, a drop in demand, and two, a drop in price. And both of those had other effects and negative effects on our economies as well. But the current period is also one which is throwing up important issues about how do we, if you like, take account of the experiences of the last 10 years and once again stick to the promise of the BRICS economies, but do so in a way in which we have a more sustainable model of growth and job creation within our environment. But one thing that's clear, ladies and gentlemen, and this is a point I've been making to many audiences over the last few weeks, and that is any talk of decoupling, which took place 5 years ago, where emerging markets were told you can't decouple from advanced economies when advanced economies are in trouble. Well, today the narrative is turned around, and clearly advanced economies can't decouple from emerging markets when they find themselves in trouble. So what is being reinforced in, if you like, global discourse is the fact that we do live in a very much interconnected and interdependent world, and where large economies take particular policy decisions, clearly there are spillover effects on other economies. And those spillover effects amongst some environments take some time to A, understand, but B, appreciate. But I think as a result of many, let's call them interesting discussions within the G20 context, we've certainly arrived at a point where there's a greater realization that bigger economies in the world, particularly those that might have the privilege of providing the reserve currency of the globe, when they make decisions, there are huge implications for others in the globe. And what we require is a new sense of complementarity and interdependence, but also carefulness in the way we approach policy decisions in order to guard against some of the negative effects of our decisions. So in this kind of context where we cannot decouple, where it looks like we're going to take turns as advanced economies and bigger emerging markets